Welcome to the Western Wisconsin Journal. I'm Pastor Kendra Grams Pastor at First Presbyterian Church here in Hudson, Wisconsin. And today I'm blessed to be joined by a couple of my colleagues from the greater Hudson area to talk about how our faith communities have been responding to the ongoing public health and economic crisis presented by COVID-19. Now, many months into this, we all continue to respond in creative ways. And so I'm thankful to have this opportunity to have another conversation with colleagues about what we are all doing to be with God's people and lift up our communities. So today I am blessed to have with me Pastor John Lestock of Bethel Lutheran Church in Hudson and Pastor Mike Roeder of Center Assembly of God for a little conversation. Good to have you both. We know these are challenging times, but we also, as people of faith, certainly try to focus on what is hopeful and life-giving. And so I wanted to just let us begin there. I know that over the last many months, I've been inspired in so many ways by people from my congregation, other congregations, and the wider community coming together in creative ways to support people, serve those in particular need. And so I thought we could start by having each of you maybe lift up what you are hopeful about in these days where you have seen what you would describe as God working through people. So John, can we begin with you? What are you hopeful about? What is Bethel Lutheran hopeful about in these days?
Well, I say the obvious, Kendra. None of us would have wished this quarantine on anyone, or much less the danger of the virus or whatever. But I'm hopeful just with the creativity that I've seen, and certainly not just at Bethel, but at Bethel itself. People have responded very well to our live streaming and our radio programs and those sorts of things. We've launched some new little Bible studies and blogs on our Facebook page. And believe it or not, our numbers have some weeks tripled of what we would normally have in the seats on a Sunday morning. So that's been pretty darn cool. Not to mention the fact that it's not just been people tuning in locally, but really from around the country. One Sunday morning, we had people from 15 different states weighing in. We've had Norway, we've had the south of France. So, in other words, our ministry really has broadened in some very positive ways. So that's pretty exciting. That's pretty hopeful. Who would have thunk? Who would have guessed something like that?
Yeah, it's great to see how God works through challenges to bring new life, as we say in our Christian tradition. Mike, what about you? What are you hopeful about? What is Christ Center Assembly hopeful about?
Yeah, I would say in a very similar way, it has been a pleasant surprise to see how Christ Center, the people of God, have responded. I think whenever there's a crisis, I think the sun is always shining above the clouds. And so in one respect, we're trying to weather the storm. But I think God has an agenda that he's trying to accomplish in and through it all. I think the enemy or the devil has an agenda. And I think sometimes we can frame the crisis or our circumstances accordingly. And so I have been so excited to see, our people rally around one another, support one another. The live stream, we were scrambling to try to get ready for that and to see people step up. And it's been fun. It's been a fun, stressful, but fun challenge.
Yes, I can relate too. I know I've been moved and inspired by both how our congregation, my staff at First Presbyterian has been amazing in adapting. We were joking as a staff just this morning that it's been a whole week since we learned a new technology, so it must be time to learn something new.
Yeah.
So that spirit of creativity, John, as you said, and leaning into new ways of being and gathering and upholding our beliefs and nurturing them, all great things. Well, so I wanted to move to maybe where God is calling us specifically for this time. You probably both are familiar with this rather famous quote from Frederick Buechner that says, "The place God calls us to is the place where our deep gladness and the world's deep hunger meet." And so taking that frame, I'm wondering if you can each share, what is the place that you think your congregation, your faith community is being particularly called to at this time? So Mike, maybe we'll start with you this time.
Yeah. Well, at Christ Center, we're a spirit-filled, gospel-centered community. And so our endeavor is to be a positive Pentecostal voice in the community. Our focus has been, one, to, not necessarily to grow a big church, but to grow big people. And so to really come alongside people and to help them embrace the opportunities and the challenges that this presents. And I think every individual is responding differently to the stress and the anxieties. Some people have really struggled with their mental health of being alone. I think there's been much written about how there's a loneliness epidemic in the world today. This just accentuated that, and so exposed some of the cracks in our foundation. And then there are others who are really, able to kind of respond in different ways. And so, we've really been leaning into spiritual formation, helping our people and find different ways in our community. We're looking forward to serving in the food shelf here in a few weeks. And so I think those are the ways that we're trying to lean into our community, into what's taking place.
Great. And can you give some examples then? You said the food shelf. What are some other spiritual formation practices that you've been really trying to lean on during this time?
Yeah, I mean, Zoom, in terms of digital discipleship, I'm just saying, hey, we need to lean into, just because we're in the midst of this, we're still called to grow in our faith. And so since we can't meet in person, we have some ladies and men's and groups that are meeting digitally and just really talking about how we respond. How are we responding? How we're responding to our culture and all that's going on and the unrest, and just continuing to have those conversations.
Great. And thank you for lifting up the mental health piece. I definitely want to come back to that, but I want to give John an opportunity to chime in and share where Bethel is being particularly called during this time.
Kendra, I think for us, it's been both the inward and the outward. We are a larger congregation, and that presents some challenges as well as some benefits. But I feel like we've really been called to do our very best to maintain community. And needless to say, that's challenging when you're not meeting live and in person. So just simple things like calling campaigns. I mean, it's not just pastors or staff people that have been involved with that, but we've had a number of folks that have stepped forward and said, I want to be a part of that. So I would like to believe that over these last, 3-4 months, that most of our people, if not all of our people, have received 3-4 phone calls of, hey, how you doing? And is there anything that we can do for you? And is there anything that you would share with the larger congregation? So between that, and then we've also had some input coming into our newsletter, which again is less than perfect, but it's just a way for people to stay connected and in tune, so they're not feeling so ostracized or adrift on their own. But meanwhile, I would say the other thing that we've really been working on is reaching out to the community. And as best as we can, and again, with social distancing, with trying to be very careful. One of the initiatives we just launched in this last week was 77, and where we came up with that number, I can't really tell you. But for the next 77 days, our challenge to our people is that we'll have 77 different acts of service in the community. And that's everything from, some of the folks that have been making masks to some of the people that are giving blood at the blood drives to people that are just helping some of the neighbors around them in their neighborhoods that maybe really are truly at risk. So, for a lot of them, that's been helping provide food, not only for our food shelf, but, we've been tying into St. Paul and just some of the needs there since the riots, since the looting and those sorts of things. So again, these are not ideal conditions, but, our folks tend to be people that rise to a challenge. So we would like to believe that, again, God is working through all of these efforts, both local and broader than just local as well.
Absolutely. Yes, and all of those acts of caring are so critical when there are so many needs in our community. And we know that as this continues to go on, that those needs deepen in many ways and shift in other ways. And so every act of service is important. So that's great to highlight. Well, Mike, I said I wanted to loop back to this mental health piece, and I know we're all feeling that, John, as you highlight with the calling campaign. I'm sure that's happening in all our congregations, as we're all aware that this is a deeply stressful time as people are anxious and worried about physical health, and the economic impacts weigh upon that as well. And we know many are out of work or not sure when they'll return to work or what that will look like. So mental wellness is certainly something we know God desires for all people. So I wonder if you could each share maybe one spiritual or faith practice that you have found particularly helpful, or that you would recommend to others as something they could possibly try to support their mental wellness or their family's mental wellness. John, what would you lift up as a spiritual faith practice to help with mental wellness?
Call it what you will, prayer partners or whatever, but we've encouraged people, again, just to stay in touch with others, to be sounding boards and good listeners, not just venting our own frustrations or our own needs, but listening to others as well. And then praying for one another. And I think we've seen that happen. Pastor Chris launched a blog, I don't know, it's probably been 3 months now, which really has grown, but just the input there. And I think the camaraderie and the fellowship and the support that I think we've seen people gaining and giving has been very encouraging. Again, this is probably true with all of our churches, but I mean, again, in light of the challenges that we're all facing, I've been amazed at how many people have been calling, not so much saying, I need help, but how can I help? Mm-hmm. And I think that's really been a great, that's been very commendable for the Christian community. How, getting back to John Kennedy's famous words of, ask not what somebody can do for you, but ask what you can do for others. I just think, again, God has shined through that in so many ways.
And thanks be to God. And Mike, back to you. What would be a faith practice, a spiritual practice that you would commend or recommend to others as they seek to nurture their mental wellness?
Well, one that's been meaningful for me is just journaling. I love to journal, and that allows me to put my thoughts, on my iPad and process through them. I think of our Tuesday morning pastor prayer has been great for me to be able to process what's going on in my life and in our church, in our community. I have another group of 3-4 guys that are, it's very therapeutic for me to be able to talk about what's going on. And so I just think this has really exposed what's going on in our lives. And I think that our foundation, I think about the parable of the solid rock, and when the storms come and beat against the house, it exposes what our lives are built on. And we're fallen people living in a fallen world. And I'll admit, I struggle. I've struggled with some of the anxiety. I've struggled with with just trying to keep it all running and keeping all the plates spinning. And I think having different individuals in my life has been great. And so it is. It's been refreshing to see in different forms how we can support one another, and how God has used others to support me.
Absolutely. Those communities of caring are so critical in so many ways. Well, also wanted to highlight, since the last time we were able to have one of these conversations with local clergy, things continue to happen in the world. And as we witnessed in late May, another Black man was killed in police custody, and that's kind of sparked both a deeper engagement with systemic racism here locally in the Twin Cities area and the country, across the world. And so just wondering if you both could perhaps share, as the whole country kind of gets more engaged in that conversation, how are your congregations feeling called to engage in these conversations? And I think, Mike, just alternating, we'll go back to you first.
Sure. No, I think it certainly has brought to the forefront just how we respond to people that are different than us, and how Christ was a bridge builder, and how he he was a wall breaker and a bridge builder. And so I think it's really been, it's difficult, it's stressful, it's challenging to be good listeners. I think humility is so what called for today with our opinions, and to be able to listen, be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to become angry. I think we all would do well to be mindful of that. I think it's been refreshing. We've had a substitute worship leader the last 4 or 5 weeks that was an African American, and it was really helpful, beneficial, and refreshing to be able to engage in conversation with him. And so I think we're still learning and growing, trying to lean into that, participating in some of the things where we can, but to continue to be uncomfortable with being comfortable with being uncomfortable. These are uncomfortable conversations, but we have to continue to have them. And in some respects, talk is cheap. We have to really begin to put our faith into action, and as individuals and as churches.
Yeah, absolutely. John, what would you add? What are your Bethel? How are you guys feeling called into these conversations?
Well, again, the death itself of George Floyd, as well as the ripple effect of all the things that went out throughout the state, the region, the country, the world, really have been a wake-up call, I think, to the white church. And, as Michael said so well, how do we listen better? How do we try to understand? How do we put ourselves in positions where hopefully we're feeling some of the empathy and some of the pain that people of color have dealt with for years and years and years. One of the things that we've talked long and hard about is how do we ride this through? In a day, my belief is we live in a day and age and time and a culture where we have very little patience. We're easily distracted. We're on to the next cause of the day or the next politically correct thing, very quickly. And so the challenge that we've talked about as leadership at Bethel is, how do we persevere? How do we stick with this long term, as opposed to the squeaky wheel that calls for the grease. So to me, that's going to be our great challenge. As I mentioned, we've begun to send some crews over to do some work, some cleanups, provide some supplies and food over to St. Paul. We haven't really touched the Minneapolis area as of yet, but even there, how do we ride that out? How it goes. Often the relief efforts go for a day, a week, a month, but normally those needs continue on. So, not just here in the early summer, but how about the late summer and the early fall? How do we continue on and ride it through. So those have been some of our discussions.
Yeah, absolutely. Those themes of humble listening, Mike lifting up that then action is required. But John, as you're so speaking so well, that this is one of those things as people of faith that we need to be in for the long haul. Jesus wasn't about knocking down walls at one time, just all at once, but doing that each and every day. And so just great to hear from good colleagues the commitment to the long-term journey that we all need to be on to embody what we believe. So we've talked a lot about the pandemic and life in the pandemic, and then brought up a little bit also the pandemic of racism. But I want to end by just giving you both the opportunity to let people know how they can connect with you. What is the best way to connect with you, either for worship or some of these great outreach and service opportunities that you all are doing. So, John, if people want to know more about what Bethel's up to, what's the greatest way to get in touch with you and see what you're doing in the community?
Folks can get in touch with us at Bethel through just our website, bethelhudson.org. It's an easy connection there. And that also leads to Facebook. We have something new posted on Facebook just about every day, whether it's a new Bible study or a blog or something of the sort. So that's the easy way. Otherwise, we still do have someone down in the office these days too. So just 715-386-8821, an easy phone call.
Great. And Mike, if people want to get connected, learn more about Christ Center Assembly of God and all you guys are doing in the community right now, how can they reach you guys?
Yeah, first of all, we're located at the intersection of County Road UU and Jacobs Lane. And right away, as soon as you get on Jacobs Lane, right to the left, our website is christcenterhudson.com. That's where they can link to our Facebook page, our Sunday morning live streams. We have been gathering for in-person worship the last few weeks, and so we meet at 10 o'clock on Sunday mornings, and we're doing our best to respect people's social distancing and people's comfort level of what's acceptable and appropriate for them. But they can join our website or be a part of Facebook and Instagram as well.
Wonderful. Well, thank you to both of you for good conversation, good thoughts, and for your ministries in the community. Thank you to the River Channel for hosting us. We hope to have further conversation with more colleagues down the line. But for now, peace and health to all.